We've just had a great meeting, a really good, very productive meeting, and I congratulated him. And we talked about some things in very strong common, like housing and getting housing built and food and prices.
I think both President Trump and I, we are very clear about our positions and our views, and what I really appreciate about the president is that the meeting that we had focused not on places of disagreement.
Talked about places of agreement, according to the mayor-elect of New York City and President Trump. Let's start there with our panel. Josh Kraushaar is a Fox News radio political analyst. Kimberly Strassel is Fox News contributor, and Fox News senior political analyst Juan Williams. Josh, boy, the commentary afterwards and the Q&A seemed like the meeting went very well. And for all that was said by both men leading up to this moment in the election, it's a different tone today.
It's pretty remarkable theater, Brett, and it's kind of also remarkable that Trump was calling Zohran Mamdani a communist earlier this week, and now he's calling him a partner for governance when he takes over as mayor of New York next year. I think there are a lot of Republicans, though, especially in Washington, who just voted in Congress about condemning socialism. There are a lot of New York Republicans, Elise Stefanik running for governor, a lot of competitive House races in New York. The Republicans were planning to tie the Democrats to Zohran Mamdani, and then you have Trump today saying a whole lot of nice things about him and retracting a lot of the attacks he made during the campaign. So, look, Trump cares about New York City. I think he cares about its governance. He wants Mamdani to succeed. A whole lot of New Yorkers do as well. But, boy, the politics just got a lot more difficult for the Republicans looking to run against Mamdani in the midterms.
That's true. I mean, today's House resolution, take a listen to some of the lawmakers.
History is clear. Socialism kills people. It leads to deaths of tens of millions, crushes religious liberty, and destroys free markets.
The resolution is completely disoriented. These plutocrat Republicans are plainly working to undermine the living standards of the working class majority of America.
What do socialists stand for? Tax-raising, job-killing policies like defunding the police.
And to your point, Josh, you have the top four Democrats in the House voting for the resolution, including the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries. So, Kimberly, what about this kind of kumbaya moment at the Oval Office?
Well, it didn't really surprise me, Brett, because it's something that it always is remarkable to me. Donald Trump, from the minute he ever was elected the first time, has been someone that was more than willing to sit down with anyone as long as they profess some sort of interest to working with him. And I think he's always been surprised, in fact, at the Democratic hostility and resistance to him. So this was outreach initiated by Mamdani. And, you know, that's good to see happen. Now, the interesting thing is, I mean, maybe this is Mamdani deciding he needs a little bit more pragmatism about the way he works. But, you know, it could also be that he is trying to take away that issue, not just to lower himself as a lightning rod and deny Republicans an easy target, but also, look, there's still talk about Donald Trump, if he were angry enough, sending in troops into New York, etc. I mean, this all certainly gives him a lot more freedom to avoid situations like that.
Well, here is President Trump, Juan, on maybe there'll be change.
I mean, he's got views a little out there, but who knows? I mean, we're going to see what works, or he's going to change also. We all change. I changed a lot from when I first came to office. I think he is going to surprise some conservative people, actually, and some very liberal people. He won't surprise them.
Juan?
Well, this is an important point I think the president's making, Brett. You got to realize that when they had the private discussion at the White House today, I think the two most pertinent issues was one, would the president cut funds for New York City, or two, would he send in ICE? And if you'll recall just a few weeks ago when the question was sending ICE into San Francisco, a lot of the leaders of the high-tech companies finally got together and said, you know, Mr. President, we don't think it's a good idea. So in New York, I think a lot of the bankers, Wall Street, Madison Avenue, I think a lot of those people said, you know what, we're interested in the success of New York, and maybe got the message to President Trump and to his aides, we're not looking to start a fight right away. And by the way, they've had meetings with Mamdani. And they feel like, you know what, he's kept the New York City police commissioner, and they're hoping that they have more influence on him because he wants to succeed. And that's the message. You know, as Kimberly was saying, Trump is a transactional type of political leader. And if Mamdani wants to do business, he's open to it. But to Josh's point, it's going to cost Republicans who were looking for a bad guy to beat up on.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about another deal that is pending, and that is this peace deal proposal, 28-point plan. Axios writes it this way: Trump peace plan, Ukraine includes NATO-style security guarantee. The plan demands painful concessions from Ukraine, but also includes unprecedented promise. President Zelensky's top objective in peace talks is to obtain robust U.S. and European security guarantee. This is the first time President Trump has been willing to put one on the table. The push now, there's signals that there's a deadline, Kimberly, that Thanksgiving, and you have to make a decision. And there's some pushback already from Ukraine saying this is too much for us to handle.
Well, I think that's understandable. I mean, this came out of the blue, and now there's the demand that it be done in days. This is very much what the Trump White House has tried to do with a lot of its peace deals, is just say, hey, moment right now, sign it. This is what's got to happen. The problem, I think, for Ukraine, and we're going to have to learn a little bit more about these NATO-style guarantees, which have been reported some, but I think there's still a lot of confusion about what they actually mean. So much of this deal is going to be very painful for Ukraine to swallow. Not just the territorial concessions, the cap on the size of its military, but also having to agree to just watch Russia be welcomed back into the West with open arms. These guarantees are going to be central. And there might need to be some more fine-tuning before, Ukraine could even debate those. But the deadline, I think, makes this harder, not easier, for them to get to a space where they need to be.
Yeah, Josh, and there's already some significant pushback up on Capitol Hill. Senator Wicker, Senate Armed Services Committee chair, others out with public statements.
Yeah, look, there's been a growing divide in the last few weeks about the Trump administration's foreign policy, especially when it comes to Ukraine and some of the most senior Republicans on Capitol Hill. Look, I think one of the concerns in this proposed agreement would be that Ukraine would have to give up some land that Russia hasn't even conquered yet. There's a lot of alarm in European capitals. Certainly Zelensky has been meeting with his advisors. He seems awfully concerned. So, look, there's a Thanksgiving deadline. I have a feeling that gets pushed back, and there's a lot more delay.
Could be the start. Could be the start. Panel, thanks so much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.